Fade out. I don't feel like we missed the fade out, but it also seemed to be skipping on my end. I don't know if it was for YouTube, but here we are.
It was not. It was not.
Oh, see, so it's just my internet shitty today. Oh wait, bleepy.
Bleepy. Where's the bleep button?
My bleeping internet. Mute. But today we've got a digitizing 911. Wait, I have the thing for that too. Where'd it go?
I was looking for it last week and I couldn't find it.
Oh no. Wait, is it under this one? There it is. Ooh, no, not that one. There we go. Wee woo. It's under a different folder, Justin. It's actually under your folder.
Oh.
I think it was put there so that you could feel more special.
Gotcha.
But we'll go ahead and check in with some of you guys in the comments. We have Miss Cindy King joining us from Cindy's in Texas. We have Mr. Matt Enderly from the Peanut Gallery. He's very busy catching up on patches. So hopefully he has popcorn to throw. Hopefully. We have Santi Cortez watching from San Francisco, California. Cindy's from hot Texas. Burning hot Odessa, Texas. I believe it's really hot down there right now. We have Miss Kingsbury Craft joining us. Hello. And Mark says you could always let me make those patches for you. I'm pretty sure he's talking to Matt there.
Matthew, yes.
I hope so. We have Arnaldo joining us as well. We have Nikki from New York. After these messages, she'll be right back. And we have Mr. Michael Downey. Where's that other dashing young fella? Well, if he's talking about the nerd from the north, he's in the comments. Cindy says, I should be at work, but I'm working in my home studio tonight. Me too.
Me too.
And we have Mr. Matt saying, FYI, it's more fun over on the YouTube side. So for those of us watching over on Facebook, one of the easiest ways that you can support us is to actually watch us on YouTube, as it drives up our YouTube watch hours and it allows us to monetize the channel. Which basically, like, it doesn't do it on lives, but if you're watching old ones, because you know how YouTube throws ads in there, then it actually gives us credit for those ads, as long as we can hit those watch hours. So I think that was more transparent than I needed to be. We'll find out. But today we have a digitizing 911. It is I would say they're interlocking, wouldn't you?
Touching.
Yeah, they're touching. They're very friendly, hugging letters. It was designed for Puff. The user posted in the group that they were having issues with it, and so we have pulled that up. We're going to do a digitizing 911, break down the design, what we would do differently, and we're going to talk more like people are beginner, first time users doing Puff. I think that's. Did I get that right? Okay.
Yeah.
Justin nods, so that means that I'm official.
Yeah, there's a lot of times that I'm sure that the veteran embroiderers out there kind of know some of the stuff that we're already talking about, but definitely on the digitizing 911, I think we like to go back to basics and kind of explain things, maybe monotonous, but explain things from the beginning, especially when it is a digitizing 911, because when someone's having a problem, not always, but there's a lot of times it is someone that may be new to the industry, a novice, whatever you want to call it, because they are kind of stuck at a point where they don't know what the issue is, whether it's a design issue, a machine issue, a hooping issue. So typically when we answer those questions in the group, seeing people's answers, seeing the person's answer that's posting, we can usually narrow it down to that is going to be a file issue. And usually,
or we can rule that out for them.
Or we can rule that out. And actually today's design is,
I'm going to add it to the stream. There we go.
Is kind of going to be partly not so much a problem from the pictures that we saw as far as the designs concern, but some issues that could have been as far as the translation between the digitizer and the end user.
All right.
So this is actually the pictures that she posted in the group.
Oh, hold on. I'm going to make that bigger. And now zoom in. Enhance.
All right. So she was having a lot of problems with the foam sticking out on mainly the outline here. I do see some issues as far as registration problems where you kind of get some gaps between the two elements, the inside of the letters and the outline, especially in this area. You might have some areas that are kind of pushing out further than they should. But the main issue she was talking about in the group was the amount of foam that was still sticking out from the outlines. Now, if anybody's done foam, there's always a cleanup process involved in foam. So you're rarely going to have a design sewn with 3D puff that you're able to rip off that extra and not have to do any type of cleanup. You're typically going to have to do the little pokey poke inside where you poke the little shards of foam that are sticking out at corners and intersections and whatnot. And then you are going to want to hit it with a heat source like a heat gun to kind of pull in those really small specks of foam that you're going to see around those edges. So I think just looking at these pictures, first off, my first reaction to this is typically designs like this where you see a two-color design. More than likely, the design was digitized where the outline is flat and the center of the letters are going to be the 3D puff element.
So I'm going to jump in here, Justin, because I think that this is a very relevant question as we're looking at the pictures of the design. But Cindy asked, "Is that variegated thread on the fill?"
That's what it looks like to me.
And I would say yes, that is. I know initially, like scrolling through the phone, and I saw that, I was like, man, that's a lot more cleanup than there should be. But it's actually variegated. I believe it's variegated thread as well, so you don't see the I don't think you're seeing necessarily the foam underneath. I think it's just variegated from like maybe black all the way to white and then back in the different shades.
Yeah, exactly. And from the post, the person that posted it was talking about specifically there was a lot of foam sticking out from the outline. So my first reaction, like I said, was, she did mention that it was digitized for 3D puff, but my first reaction is I can tell the way the two elements are reacting to each other. I can tell that the outline was sewn first, and then the GT, the variegated thread part of it, is sewn second.
Yep, and you can see that from the side profile picture too. How the
exactly.
GT, it's almost like, if I had to guess from that picture, I would say she used 2 layers of foam, one under the white and then another one underneath the variegated, just by how much it's sticking up higher.
I don't think she did, but I can see what you're saying, how this middle part kind of looks like it's higher up. Mm-hmm. And I think I know why. Because like I said, first reaction, and when I questioned it was, is the outline supposed to be flat and the inner part supposed to be 3D puff, which I would say 90% of the time, that's kind of the style of 3D puff. Outlines are flat, inside is puff. Not to say that the whole design couldn't be set up as 100% 3D puff, but that was my first inclination to question that. So upon talking to her, she kind of just said, like I said, she just asked the digitizer to digitize for 3D puff. I think the one thing here that was kind of missing was the communication between her digitizer and her to find out exactly what elements are supposed to be 3D puff. Because, there's, send this design to 5 digitizers, say 3D puff. There's going to probably 6 different interpretations of it. So
yeah, you can have 6 different files, and 4 of them are probably going to be right.
Exactly.
I can honestly say, though, when somebody sends me letters that look like this, and they say I want 3D puff, for me the outline will go flat, and then the center element will be puff. Unless if they tell me otherwise, that's the first That's where my brain goes instantly, just because you do so many of these and that's how they are.
Exactly.
I don't know about you, Justin.
No, exactly. And I mean, if it was just the GT with no outline and someone says digitize this 3D puff, of course, to me, it's 100% 3D puff. But the fact there's an outline in my order form, when you order digitizing from me, I know I've been told that it's a lengthy form that every time that they order, but I try to collect as much information, and it says that if you are marking 3D puff, please note what elements you want 3D puff, because this GT is pretty simple. It's got 2 elements to it, and you can kind of assume that it means the outline is flat. But if there's all kinds of different elements and logos and lettering and stuff, and someone says 3D puff, I have no clue what they're wanting to achieve 3D puff. There is one customer of mine that pretty much all he does a lot of sports teams, and I'd say 99% of his designs are 3D puff. And when he orders them, he'll say, he actually sometimes will color his artwork because everything comes from him as vector. He'll color the 3D puff elements green every time. And it'll say green elements are 3D, rest of it's flat, which is perfect information for your digitizer. There's no question of what he's thinking and what I need to do to achieve the design that he's trying to do. So she did include the spec sheet from the digitizer with the file she sent me. And right off the bat.
Okay, hold on. You got to zoom in a little bit too.
Is that good? I know it's a little fuzzy already. Right off the bat, just seeing the 2 colors in this color sequence, it shows the black sewing first, and the fact that they added a stop code after the black tells me that there's supposed to be a stop to add the foam. So I don't typically do that unless a customer asks me for it. 9 times out of 10, that stop is done on the machine side. You can add a stop function on the machine side when you're entering your color sequence, but in the software, you can add that as well. So it's basically giving that code to stop the machine to give you a chance to add that foam. So right off the bat, looking at this as the end embroiderer, getting this information from the digitizer, seeing that there's a stop after that first color is going to kind of give me that inclination that it is going to be a flat element with a stop, and then the 3D puff element after that.
Okay.
So, okay. Now, again, assuming all this, it very well could be that if this was a 2-layer 3D design, it could have been that there was a first layer outline 3D puff, adding a stop to add the second layer of 3D puff. But this is not the case. So, and to 100%, prove that what we're thinking is correct, just going into my software here and, not knowing what software this person is using, just going in here and selecting that outline, that satin outline, I see that the density is pulling up at 0.45. So even at a regular flat element, it's slightly under what I usually do, but it's pretty much indicating that that is not a 3D puff element. So right off the bat, the use of the puff on the outline was an error by this user, in that that element was not supposed to be, or it's not digitized for 3D puff. So
I'm going to throw this in here just because I like to make it harder for you, Justin, and it's fun for me. But when Justin imported this file, this file was a DST file. This was a machine file that was given to us, and I can tell from Justin's screen, I can see that based off of his sequence list. You can see the run, the satin, the run, and then you see those manual stitches. And a lot of times in software, when you get into your lock stitches, it'll add your lock stitches as manual stitches. So depending on how you have it in your software, Justin, if you have it so that it imports as manual stitches, because you can do that, it'll import the entire object as a manual stitch, how would they know what the density is?
Well, if you zoom in and you take it off let's turn this color off. So of course your computer or your software is going to be showing the actual stitches. The reason why there is a longer stitch here and then a shorter stitch, anytime satins come around a corner, they add short stitches, and that way it doesn't bunch up with a bunch of needle penetrations in the inside of these corners. So these short stitches are something that the software does add. It is a setting when you are digitizing. But if you come in here and you try to find pretty much a straightaway where all the stitches are the same distance from each other, you could actually, if you have let me turn this to metric here. If you have a ruler function in your software, you just measure between the stitches, and that measurement there is at 0.42. So yeah, that's the best way. If you are pulling it in and it is have a software that can only bring in things as per stitch or each as a manual stitch, that's how you'd measure that out. So zoom in really close, get it where you can kind of see those stitches in the gap between them, and just measure those. So.
Okay, so now I have another question.
Yeah.
Don asks, when doing 3D puff along with an outline, wouldn't the puff portion be done first?
It is not. Typically when I'm digitizing, I try to do all of the flat elements first. But that being, something that is a large design across the full front of the hat, there are times where I try to break it up as much as possible, where I'm kind of separating elements out where it does flat foam, just because of registration purposes on sewing across the front of the hat. But in this instance, and typically the 3D puffs designs that you see is kind of a real bold letter or two letters that are right in the center of the hat. You want to sew your flat elements first. What that's going to do is, if you were kind of going back and forth between outlines or flat elements and 3D puff elements, if you already have a 3D puff element on your hat and you're trying to go back and sew something that's flat, and that element is anywhere near that foam, so now you're going to cause that pressure foot to unnecessarily push on that foam more, therefore smashing it down. Therefore, it can cause that embroidery that's going over that foam to possibly be messed up a little bit. So yeah, traditional digitizing, I've seen people still on letters like this throw down the outline first, second color second. Personally, I don't do it that way. I usually do the inside shape first, whether it be a fill stitch or whatever, and then finish it with a satin border outline to finish that edge. So yeah, that's why you typically want to do your 3D puff elements last.
So another reason for that too is if you do your 3D puff elements first, you're now cleaning the hat while it's sitting on the machine waiting for your next element.
Mm-hmm. That's another thing.
The biggest reason why I do it second is production time. I can do my foam last, take that hat off, put the next one, and then I'm cleaning it while the next hat's running. So you run into that with production time too. Now sometimes you'll do a piece, and I'm just going to call it a piece because it's going to be one that you're going to do things a little bit differently, just because you're only making one, and you're trying to do it differently so that it looks different. And then the production time doesn't really matter to you because you're only making one. You don't care if you're cleaning it on the machine. You're doing something more for the piece of art than you are for production.
Right. And in this particular instance, doing the outline second, if you do that inside part of the GT, and say like you just have the one pull of foam where you can get the excess off the majority of it, and then you come back and now you're trying to kind of sew that border where it's kind of hugging that edge of the foam. So you're going to have one border falling off to the surface of the hat, one of it catching that edge of the foam. So now that loft that you're getting from that 3D foam, whatever you're using, the 3-4 millimeter, whatever you're using. So say that loft is sitting at 3 millimeters when you first do it, you add that border to it, it's going to start smashing down because you're adding that extra thread count on top of that foam. So now you're going to have this kind of weird falling off of the edges.
It's going to be a weird M, like a little.
Yeah. So yeah, if you're looking at it from the side, that outline is going to be hitting your foam, and then it's going to be dropping down, hitting your hat. So that's going to be kind of this waterfall going off the edge of the edge of your 3D element.
If your center column is not very wide, it'll actually push it over, and so now you're going to have your column it's not going to sit vertically; it's going to sit laying off to one side, and you can most definitely see that roll. Ask me how I know. But it is something that you need to keep into account when you're doing this kind of stuff. If you're making narrow columns and you're going to try and throw a pressure foot next to it, it's going to tip over.
Yeah, and anytime you're adding these obstacles with thread, and then you're throwing obstacles like 3D foam in there, when you're not sewing through the foam at the points that you're supposed to be at, the using the cutting elements that you're supposed to be, and really paying attention to the digitizing that's for the foam purposes, and then you start coming back with other elements that aren't necessarily built for foam, you're going to have deflection, you're going to have thread breaks, you're going to have all kinds of different problems, not to mention that the design's not going to look very clean. So
I mean, honestly, I have cleaned up puff designs where the digitizer forgot to change the density for cutting foam. And
who would do that?
Who would do that? I don't know. But you end up spending a lot of time cleaning it up. You can clean it up to where it'll look good. But it's a lot of cleanup. You'll be sitting with that hat for 45 minutes poking and heating and trying to get it clean. And I mean, a Puff Pro tool, if you have a if you have a 3D Puff Pro tool from 3dpuffprotools.com, the cleanup goes a lot easier. And I highly recommend getting one of those tools. It was invented by that guy. And I have like 3 or 4 of them. I can always find one when I need to use it, but when I don't need to use it, I don't know where they are. But I would recommend picking up one of those tools because it'll help you with your cleanup just in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like we mentioned earlier, you're always going to have cleanup when it comes to 3D Puff. It's just a given. The designs going to really dictate how much cleanup when there's a lot of little areas and little small areas that you're trying to dig out. That Access 3D Puff, which this is a great tool to use to try to get those small areas. And then of course, proper digitizing. And if anybody's heard us talk about 3D Puff on this live, or even the webinars that I've had on 3D Puff, it's a balance of trying to get that right density and using the right amount of stitches that are going to give you the cleanest design for the 3D foam, and still that balance of not trying to hammer it so much that you're going to end up just destroying that foam and pushing it down so much that you're not going to get any loft, and it's going to be pointless of trying to do 3D Puff. So
yep, and I just dropped in the chat links.embnerd.com. If you go to our website, you can find the webinars that Mr. Justin Armenta has done on 3D Puff. There you go.
All right. So let's jump into this. Shameless plug.
Shameless plug.
All right. So I'm going to do a quick run through of this design just to kind of show you the way this was digitized. And
Hold on.
yeah.
I'm going to make it bigger. And True View, if you could.
There we go. So, like I said, going through this design, there's been times where we get some digitizing 911s where the file is pretty in need of help. This one wasn't too bad in my opinion. There's definitely some stuff that I would do differently.
I honestly think this one is it's more of a digitizers do things differently for different reasons, and
exactly,
it's not necessarily that this is a bad one. It's just that I would also do it differently for different reasons, then they do.
Right. Yeah. The main thing that I saw in this very well could be that the fact that this end user did use foam on both layers, but the registration problems I think are the main issue that I can see that can be possibly because of the digitizing. But other than, I mean, just kind of looking through this design should just in theory should work if it's ran the correct way, as far as the bottom layer being flat and the second layer being 3D puff. Those variegated threads, are they a true 40 weight? Do you know?
They are, yes.
What's that?
They are.
They are. Okay.
It's the frosted mat that runs thinner.
Okay. So yeah, I'm not too familiar with the variegated threads. I know some 40 weight threads that come in certain colors, like that frosted mat. They do run, I would say, closer to maybe a 50 weight thread. So that might be an issue in itself if someone's using kind of a specialty thread that's not going to react the same as 40 weight, but this isn't the case on that one.
Yep. And see, just in general, they use like a 0.4 density. When I work on hats, even with flat work, I use probably a 0.35 density. It's weird with the curvature of a hat that thread doesn't cover nearly as much or nearly as well as on, let's say, a regular garment. So it's either beefing up the density so that I can see it, or I can't see it, or really upping the underlay, which they used a center run underlay in a standard density, and I would have used actually a center run and a zigzag with a tighter density to just ensure that I get the coverage. Because for me, that would look, if she didn't have the foam on there, it would look a little too thin. That's what I was using. And Cindy actually says a lot of variegated is rayon, and you really have to watch. Yep. So I know like the Floriani variegated is 50% polyester and 50% rayon.
Okay, so yeah, if she is watching and you are using rayon, that is definitely something that you may want to consider changing to polyester, just because rayon can give you issues as far as running in production. It's not as strong as polyester, so going through that extra layer of that foam, it tends to have a lot more thread breaks than polyester. So
just in case you don't know, rayon is cotton thread, and poly is polyester. So a lot of times we talk about rayon, but it's actually just like a cotton normal sewing thread, and it doesn't always have the same tensile strength that the polyester variant does.
Right. So right off the bat, like Jeff was just mentioning, I would go through here. I would grab that outline and give it some extra density, just because, like Jeff was saying, I do agree with him that a little bit more extra density on regular satins is kind of necessary on hats. Seeing the overlap of that satin, that outer satin here, underneath the 3D puff element, I think is pretty good. You definitely don't want to digitize it where you're bringing that outline just to the edge of the other element, because you are going to have some pull on both elements. So when they pull away from each other, that's definitely going to cause that issue of registration problems that aren't going to line up properly. So you definitely want to do that overlap that you see here. Personally, when it comes to 3D puff designs, I over exaggerate that outline. I make it quite a bit more bold than the artwork may be, just because 3D puff, if you know the rules of push and pull when it comes to thread, 3D puff is, I would say, 5 times as much when it comes to the push and pull, the way it reacts. You're dealing with heavier densities when it comes to the 3D puff elements. So, a push of a 3D element is going to be definitely a lot more than a push of a regular satin stitch. So I changed the density of that outline, and I'm just going to give it some pull compensation as well to make it a little bit bolder. As far as the outline, I think that outline's pretty, nope. One thing I always like to do, and I always preach on hats, is global underlay. So global underlay is, I typically use a running stitch, a higher stitch length, that higher stitch length is going to do two things. It's not going to add too much density to your design. It's also the longer stitch length is going to give that loft of that underlay to kind of keep everything, all the top stitches above it are going to lay a little bit more on top of that stitch. It's not a really short stitch length that's going to be hammered into that hat fabric. So I always, here's my center point. You got your 0 line here. I always start my start points because you're going to have those tie-in stitches. I keep them away from that center point because you don't want those tie-in stitches to be right in the middle of your seam. So I typically just kind of go from the center, work my way one way, and just kind of do a zigzag type stitch. And what this is going to do, this is going to flatten out the surface of your cap, and it's going to secure that stabilizer to your hat.
So Cindy says, Jeff, I'm not sure you would say rayon is made from cotton unless I misunderstood. Rayon is cotton threads that have a little bit of a synthetic component to it. If I remember right, it's more absorbent. It's non-insulating like cotton is. So it does have a little bit of synthetic in it. But when I compare it with a fully polyester, I tend to call it cotton. So my bad.
All right, so that's basically what my global underlays look like. It's not a real heavy density. Like I said, the stitch length on those is I usually use 4 to 5 millimeters, somewhere in there. And again, that's just kind of flattening out the surface of your cap, making sure that stabilizer is secure to the back of the hat, and that way, hopefully, you're working with the most stable surface you can, as long as the hat is hooped properly. So I'm going to resequence this to the beginning of the design. Their starting point is down there, so I want to make sure that my ending point of this underlay is going to go down there and meet the starting point. All right, so I add that. I might go ahead and hide that outline. Well, you know what, maybe I shouldn't do that. Hide that and mark this. Okay. So the main things that I see when it comes to the 3D puff elements, take this one by one. Mainly this running stitch outline that they're using down the center. I know a lot of people use a running stitch to tack down the foam to keep it from moving. There are certain customers that prefer me using this, and they have, asked me to use it. Typically, I only like using these when I have a really wide element that I know that running stitch isn't going to kind of fall outside of that sewing area, where it kind of falls outside the satin. But typically, I don't do a running stitch throughout the whole design like this. Again, that balance of trying to reduce the amount of stitches that are going into that foam, reduce the amount of times that pressure foot is hitting the foam. The more you can do that, the better off. The stitch length on this running stitch is also at 1.7. To me, that is quite a short stitch length. So again, shorter stitch lengths means more stitches within this element, which means more hits on that foam, more stitches, more pressure foot hitting that foam. So again, less is more when it comes to 3D puff. So I personally wouldn't use this.
So one of the other things that can do is it actually cave in the center of your puff.
Exactly. Yeah.
And your side can roll in.
Right. Having that really short stitch length, you're putting that pressure, not only, doing the things I said before, you're kind of got to start making that foam concave in the middle, which can change the look of the top stitches. If I were to use those tack down stitches, Typically, I just kind of pick a point that's kind of the furthest right and furthest left points. Again, these stitches are just kind of used to tack down the foam so it doesn't move. I personally like using either a rubber band that sits right where the bill meets the crown and you have your foam sitting on, and use the rubber band that holds it in place. I think that is a good solution to keep the foam in place. Some people use tape on the sides of the foam. Just make sure it's not going to be in your sewing field. But like I said, some people do prefer this tack down method. So it's going to tack down just a few stitches to tack down the foam before you start sewing your main elements. But typically I usually just kind of do one on this side of the design, one on the other side. Again, a longer stitch length, so it's not going to hit that foam too many times. So running through the elements, I do have those 2 tack down stitches. I do see that they use that technique of having the jagged edge on the capping ends, and because this element here, this satin does have an open end on each side, you do need to cap these to make sure that the foam is cut. I do usually use kind of like this zigzag technique to make sure that it doesn't sever the inside of that element. It's definitely going to sever the outside where you want it to, but it's not going to fully cut the inside when you kind of have that zigzag inside. One thing I do see, they are bringing the edge of these caps like up here really close to the edge of the top stitch here. I usually try to bring those back a bit.
I'll also add, you want to check your stitch length in there. The narrower the satin, the narrower, the more compressed it's going to pull down on the foam. So if you do a really short stitch length cap underneath there, it's going to really pull that end down, and you're not going to get as good of a look or as even of a look going across the full satin.
Absolutely, you actually took the words right out of my mouth. This at the shortest point, it is just over a 1 millimeter, so a 1.25 millimeters. Typically, what I usually do is, and I'll just kind of show you the way I cap mine. In Wacom, I do have this element here that does a jagged edge on one side, so it kind of gives me that jagged edge. And also, I do make sure that I kind of make my caps knowing that jagged edge is going to be, bring this up front, is going to stagger that length. I want to make sure that the majority of that body is not a really, really short stitch, because like Jeff was saying, you have really short stitches in there, it's going to really pile down that foam, and it's not going to give you a very clean cap at the end there. So the rules to caps are to make sure that you kind of keep the inner edges away from the outer edges of that foam, to make sure that it doesn't push out to the sides of that foam. And if you can see here, this one was kind of sticking out completely. All right, so sometimes it's difficult to work with the design elements that are from that DST file, because it's not like a true running stitch. It's bringing a lot of things through as manual stitches. So it's just it's not a matter of me grabbing an element and changing the stitch length, because manual stitches are basically, we're going to drop a needle at every node or every point that's plotted when they're manual stitches. So when you are trying to do quick edits and just kind of adjust settings, it's just not a matter of grabbing an element and changing a setting. It's an actual, every stitch is, or every node is its own stitch. So I'm just going to kind of go through here for the sake of time and just kind of digitize this, make those changes by just digitizing the elements the way I would do it. I actually try to keep whenever starting on a cap or any element in 3D Puff, I try to keep the starting point inside instead of the outer part, because you know you're going to have your tie-in stitches, which are short stitches to tie in that thread. You don't want that kind of on an outside edge because it could make a little bulge in your element there. So let's see here. I'm just changing these elements to red as I go through it because it's a little bit easier to see. So I have this one here. This peak here, that is a technique that I use. Anytime you have two perpendicular elements, you are going to have that seam where those two meet. So that peak on the one that's going to be underneath the next one that's going vertically, that kind of ensures that there is no gap between those two elements. That area kind of gives you a gap where it's going to hug over it to make sure that there's no foam kind of poking through. Another thing that I do in my 3D Puff designs is anytime there are two intersecting areas, I do what's called a bridge, and that's basically a light densitied satin stitch. And what that's going to do is where these two sections are going to cut the foam in different ways. You have a horizontal line that's cutting the foam. This is going to basically grab that foam to make sure that that foam stays down and it's not poking up between those two intersections. So typically I use both these techniques together just to kind of ensure it, but one or the other is sufficient as well. So as you can see, it kind of does this side of this foot and comes back, and I'll add the running stitch here. Sequence that. So it does this side, comes back to the other end here, and comes back in. As you can see, these two elements, it does overlap a bit. And again, that's just two elements coming together to make sure that that foam, if it was just butting up exactly to there, the foam's going to want to try to protrude through there as you're putting these extra dense foam stitches on the foam. It's really putting pressure on that foam, and the foam's going to want to stick out wherever it possibly can. So, so overlapping that is a good idea as well. Okay, and again, just resequencing this, come down here. So I'm going to add a bridge there because again, there's two elements. You have your vertical line that's going to be coming up underneath this horizontal line here. So you are going to have, again, that top horizontal line is going to be cutting that foam. So there's a possibility of that foam kind of sticking up. So I would kind of start that, work my way down through the design. I try to set my bridges and my foundational stitches first. And that way, when it's sewing the actual top satins, as it goes through the path that I'm choosing, it already has those foundational stitches laid down first. So let me know if there's any questions there, Jeff. I'm just kind of babbling away here.
Not yet. There's rayon is a synthetic fiber that combines just the right amount of polyester, cotton, and rayon, which viscose is, according to Google, made from pulp. But Cindy says, whatever it's made from, I don't use rayon. Washing issues, color fade, which I have seen some people use the, it's like foam. Floriani makes it. It's Floriani dimensional topping that they use. So you actually have to wash it with water to get the edges off, and that would cause a problem with rayon. And There you go. Barb joining us says, I have the DMC machine cotton embroidery thread, which feels coarse compared to rayon machine embroidery thread. I think it's agreeing with her. She mainly uses polyester embroidery thread. I think that's kind of industry standard now, as everybody uses polyester.
Pretty much, yeah.
I'm not.
I know the big argument with rayon is it has a better sheen to it. It's a little bit brighter, so I guess it looks prettier than polyester. So,
but it'll fade in the sun.
Yes,
that problem.
And if you are working with garments that are getting industrial washing, rayon tends to bleed when polyester doesn't. So when you're dealing with uniforms or chef coats and stuff like that, if you are using a rayon thread that gets bleached, it is going to bleed all over that garment. So again, just for time's sake, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to redigitize all these elements just to kind of show you the direction.
Justin, we have a question from the Sassy Subber. I find that my corners are where my foam sticks out the most. Any way to fix that? And that's going to be where your caps and your satins meet.
Okay, so a corner like this, yes. The foam tends to be most problematic where the caps and the ends meet, and these corners here as well. So as you can see, I kind of did the foundational stitches here, came back down, did this leg, came back up. One thing I wanted to point out here, that I'll make a change down here, is these two sections where the G and the T come together. I did a bridge as well, just because I know they're not perpendicular to each other, but you do have two satins that are running parallel to each other. So sometimes having that where they want to pull away from each other, that's another section where that foam wants to try to escape. So I usually do a bridge between those two elements, walk down to the cap. I'm going to come back down and walk around to this other end. And yeah, the way to kind of combat that area that this foam sticks out, these corners, is as I'm walking to the next element, again, using a longer stitch length, I tend to give this area a little bit more foundational stitches, and that's going to hold down that foam in place. Just to make sure that you're not going to have anything escaping. You don't want to be too close to the edge, but I usually use these little extra stitches in here, and that's going to tap down that foam to make sure that it's not going to push out. It's going to hold it in place. So again, the caps on the ends. One thing I did notice, if you can see like the distance between two parallel areas as far as the outline to the edge of the 3D foam, you're looking just over 2 millimeters. It's the same distance that they're using at the ends of the 3D puff. Like I was stating earlier, when you have the push of thread, when it comes to the 3D puff, it is quite a bit more than a regular push. So I tend to grab these elements that are going to be pushing towards your outline, and I'm going to shorten them up a bit. And that way, maybe not that much. And that way, when they push out, they're going to actually be even distance, how thick that outline should be. So it's actually going to be, when sewn, it's going to push out to about here and making that outline look uniform all the way around. So I'm going to move those caps up a bit.
All right, so we have Ramona asking here, do you have a standard guideline that you use to prevent waterfall on the ends? Go for it.
Why don't you explain what a waterfall is, and I'll tell you what I do for it.
All right, so I'll explain what a waterfall is while Justin's zoned in there and digitizing at 800 miles an hour. So a waterfall is when you have your cap, which is a stopping point in a vertical wall. When you're running your satin over the top, the satin ends up falling off that edge. And you see it in a lot of newer digitizer designs. I'll put it that way, when they first start digitizing 3D Puff, because it's not something that they necessarily look at and go, oh, I need to fix this, but it's something that the trained eye will pick up. And so when I do a cap, I usually come back anywhere from 0.75 to a millimeter and allow 0.75 to a millimeter worth of push for the thread to come in. One of the ways that you can deal with that too is that you can actually sew it out and you can count the number of threads that fall over the edge, and you can back it up that many threads on your screen. It's definitely not a what you see on your screen is what you get in real life, especially when it comes to 3D Puff. With the amount of density that you're using, the threads push a lot more, and you see that distortion like Justin is compensating on the length of the satins there, because they are going to push out longer.
So they're going to push out just as much as this finished product is going to push out. This top stitch here is going to push out past that cap, and that's what the waterfall is where that top satin is going to push out past the cap, so it kind of waterfalls over. You have like really loose threads because you're not the foam is actually cut at that point, so that thread kind of falls into no man's land. So yeah, there is a compensation between the actual cap itself. You can see the outline there. It's capped, it's going to actually extend out further because that top satin's going to push. Those two, when you have the pull of the cap and the push of the top satin, those are going to meet up. So I'm just running through this. When I travel through I guess I didn't need to travel because there's a cap over there. Don't mind me, I'm just talking to him.
No, that's okay. I know you talk to yourself all the time.
Do you talk to yourself while you're digitizing, Jeff?
Usually I say, why the heck did you do that, a lot, but under my breath so I don't sound crazy.
I'll be flying along and then I'll go back and catch myself to resequence or something like that. And I'll be like, what was I thinking 10 minutes ago?
Yep. When I did this that way, I don't know why.
Exactly.
So if Justin hits the T key on his TrueView keyboard, we can see what he's doing.
There you go.
There we go.
Sorry about that, folks. So again, the original file has the ends a little bit further out, which is going to be pushing into that outline. So I am compensating a bit on those. And I'll run through the sew sequence and when I'm almost done here, so you can see.
And then I'll point out all the problems Justin just introduced into the file. No,
yeah, there you go.
There's only one that I see that I'm like, that might be a problem, but we'll see.
What's that?
The honestly, the outline at the top of the G where it drops down. Yep, I think that's, if you look at the picture, that's one of the areas that they had issues with, where it didn't extend far enough under. And you can see, at least me looking at it, both the top and the bottom of that, it doesn't extend as far underneath. So you're more likely to have a registration issue there than anywhere else.
Okay. Oops.
I mean, that's just my theory, Justin. You can tell me I'm full of it.
So right in here, was it on the bottom or the top here?
Top. Right
okay,
in that crook.
Yeah,
there pictures up.
There is a I don't know if that's
that could
variegated thread in the foam. Yeah, because I see it here and I see it here.
Yep.
But I think with the
variegated makes it hard to tell.
Yeah, I think with the global underlay giving the outline a little bit more column width, pull comp, and not using foam on the outline, I think it should solve that, because all of that is pretty tucked in pretty nice here. As far as like the how I was telling you, this is tucked in sufficient enough underneath the foam, so it's not going to have registration problems. You will see that at the ends here, it doesn't look like it's tucked in very much, because that is, again, the ends of that vertical piece that you see here is going to push out. So you're actually undercompensating. It's pull comp or push comp, because it is going to push out once it's sewn. So if I go through and see, and hide this. All right, so we added the global underlay. Give the outline a little bit more density and pull compensation. Now the blue is going to be the original file when it comes to the 3D puff. So it does kind of, there was elements that I used, so it's missing the bottom of the T there.
That's
but
okay.
As you can see, one of the main things that I saw were the two things, or actually the three things that I saw that I really wanted to make a change were the lack of push compensation when it comes to the ends. So the ends here are going to push out further than onto the outline than the parts that are running parallel to the outline. The width of the cap they used was pretty thin, so we don't want to smash that down when it comes to the ends. And the travel stitches throughout the foam elements, they are using quite a small stitch length when it comes to those. So again, more needle penetrations, more pressure foot hitting that foam, more indentations they're going to make on that foam. So that's the original. And this is mine, where it has the extra bridges, compensation for the push, bridge there. Again, compensation for that push comes around. So the general pathing and the general way that the 3D elements is pretty much the same, with these slight little adjustments. And I will get this saved over to the user.
Control S.
Yeah.
Hopefully it doesn't crash right before you hit Control S.
Exactly.
That never happens,
There we go.
right?
Oh.
He saved it. Uh-oh. What's your error message? Security dongle not connected. Please hang up and try again.
Oh, that was weird. It's saved.
It's saved. Oh, thank goodness it's saved. All right. Well, that brings us up on the hour, Justin. You actually finished about, I don't know, 65 seconds too soon. So we're going to need to fudge for another minute. But while we're wrapping up here, I'm going to go ahead and put in links.embnerd.com, where you can go and you can you'll find all access to where we're at. You can join the group, you can join the Discord, where you can join the discussion and ask any questions that you have about embroidery in general, digitizing material supplies. All of that stuff can be found in those two locations, or asked in those two locations. And we're more than happy to help you guys out there. Coming up, we've got the Applique Getaway coming in July that I'm going to be at, along with Adam from bjjhats.com. He sits over there. That's why I pointed. And that's going to be coming up there. And then I don't know if we have anything else planned. I know that Justin got the shirt orders out. He's wearing one there. He looks all professional and everything. But that's all the announcements I have. I don't know if you have anything, Justin.
No, if you guys, like Jeff said, if you guys have any problems with the designs, we'll be happy to feature them here on the Digitizing 911. See if we can improve on those designs for you, so you don't pull your hair out when you're on the machine. When it comes to 3D Puff, I do suggest you get one of these tools. It's a great tool for those that do 3D Puff and enjoy 3D Puff, and they're 3D Puff enthusiasts like Jeff and I are. But yeah.
I found it. Else. I feel professional now. I found the thing. You can go to 3dpuffprotools.com. But I'll go ahead and wrap us up here. I'm Jeff Fuller from Fuller Embroidery Works. That is Justin Armental from JA Digitizing Studios. Both here representing the Embroidery Nerd. We'd like to thank you guys for hanging out with us, and we'll catch you guys next time.
Good night, guys.